The conversations a therapist and their patient share are among the most private conversations someone can have. But many states have passed legislation to ban these conversations under the guise of stopping so-called conversion therapy. Well, one counselor in Washington state was in court today arguing that these legal restrictions on private conversations are illegal. Here's part of what they had to say.
The only questions this law cares about are two. Who are you? Are you licensed? And what goal is this conversation headed towards? And that, Your Honor, is not identifying a particular treatment. That's prohibiting a particular conversation directed towards a particular goal. That is censorship of disfavored ideas. It is censorship of speech.
Joining me to discuss this Washington state law and the federal court hearing on it today is Jake Warner with the Alliance Defending Freedom, who is representing the counselor in this case. Jake, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thanks for having me on the show.
We are glad to have you. Now, tell us a bit about your client, Brian Tingley, in this law that essentially bans him from carrying out his duties as a therapist.
Brian's a remarkable man. He's been a counselor for over 20 years. He's a licensed marriage and family therapist in particular, and he helps children, adults, and couples with a range of issues, including dealing with anxiety and depression, but also with struggles related to sexual orientation and gender identity. And that's where the Washington law comes into play. It says that counselors should not have certain conversations on these topics with their clients, even when the clients want to have these conversations. It really interferes with the client getting the help that they need and that they want. And that's what the problem here. And the law threatens Brian with penalties up to $5,000 per violation.
Now, everyone is opposed to coercion and abuse by a therapist. And unfortunately, coercion and abuse are already covered by professional misconduct rules, in some cases, criminal laws in the state of Washington and around the country. What is the motive? Why does the state of Washington want to come in and say, you therapist, or actually you client, are not allowed to have these conversations with your therapist? You're not allowed to have this therapeutic goal because we don't think it's good for you. What business is that of the state of Washington?
Well, the law is really targeting disfavored ideas. The state has one view about what clients should want for their lives, but what we believe is that the government has no business dictating what conversations a counselor can have with his or her client. The client should set the agenda for these conversations. The client should set the goals for what they want to achieve. And many of Brian's clients come from a faith background, and they want to live consistently with their faith. That's their root identity. And what this law says is that those clients can't have the conversations that they want to have with counselors like Brian.
Are there other examples, Jake Warner with the Alliance Defending Freedom, of a government telling a therapist, you're not allowed to discuss this particular subject or this particular therapeutic outcome with your clients?
We've actually seen similar laws pop up around the country. One most recently comes from Boca Raton, Florida. A local ordinance was challenged there. It looked very similar to the law that Brian is challenging in Washington. And the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that the First Amendment protects these private conversations between a counselor and his or her client. The government has no business telling clients that they can't get the help that they want and that they can't have the conversations that they want to have with their counselor. And additionally, ADF has represented a counselor in New York City. And when ADF filed a lawsuit a couple of years ago challenging a similar law there, the city actually backtracked and had to pay ADF's client $100,000 in attorney's fees. So unfortunately, these laws are becoming more popular, but the good news is that courts are recognizing how these laws negatively, really violate the First Amendment.
And Jake, I want to put a finer point on my last question, which I don't think I worded as well as I would have liked. besides sexual orientation, gender identity, and this so-called conversion therapy realm, is there any other subject, any other therapeutic outcome that a client could request? I want to stop smoking. I want to lose weight. I want to deal with my anger. Any other example of where the state legislature or a government at any level has come in and said, therapist, counselor, you may not help your clients achieve that outcome? Or is this unique?
This is pretty unique. What you're talking about here is just simple conversations between a counselor and his or her client. These are private conversations. And like you said at the beginning of this segment, these are some of the most protected conversations we have in America. They are privileged conversations when you're talking about a courtroom setting. So it's really a very unique thing that the law would target this kind of private conversation between a counselor and his or her client. And certainly this particular law targets and disfavors a certain view that the government simply doesn't like.
So Jake, what were the legal arguments made to the court today? What's the legal basis of the challenge?
Well, it's a First Amendment challenge. What ADF argued in court today is that the First Amendment forbids the government from dictating the private conversations between a counselor and his or her client. You see, people like Brian, that what they do is they sit in a room, they listen, they engage in conversation. They're not doing anything more than talking and having a conversation with people who want to talk through problems in their life. And what we told the court is that there's no constitutional basis for the government to interfere with these kinds of conversations. And we asked the court to strike down this application of the law on First Amendment grounds, just like the 11th Circuit did in Florida not too long ago.
Jake, it seems to me that at the heart of this issue is you have politicians who don't understand why someone who might experience gender dysphoria or same-sex attraction wouldn't want to embrace that. Because the worldview of the politicians is you should love that you should claim that identity, you should celebrate that. And they can't bring themselves to understand why somebody might feel that way, but not be at peace with that and want to feel differently. And because they don't understand why someone might want to live a different way, they've stepped in these cases and said, therefore, you may not live that way. You may not try to be that person. We are going to put it in their vernacular, we're going to deny you the opportunity to live your truth if your version of living your truth is inconsistent with my version of living my truth. So there does seem to be some hypocrisy here. But Jake, last question I have for you. Are you optimistic about the outcome of this? What is the court going to do?
We're very hopeful that the Ninth Circuit is going to get this decision right. Like I said, the Supreme Court recently weighed in on a case that said that counselors like Brian, they are deserving of First Amendment protection just like everyone else. And what we've seen is that as these laws have popped up around the country, more and more courts are getting the issue right and saying that the First Amendment protects these private conversations and ensures that clients can get the help that they need and that they deserve from their counselor. So we're very hopeful that the Ninth Circuit's going to get this right. We won't know probably for a few weeks or even a few months from now, though.
We are also helpful, but Jake Warner, on behalf of us and all Americans, we are so grateful to you and the great people at the Alliance Defending Freedom for all you do every day to protect freedom and all of us and our religious freedom. And so grateful for your organization and so grateful for your time today as well. God bless you all.
Thanks so much for having me on the show today.